"We don't need you anymore, Dad. Just go." That's what my son said to me on a Tuesday evening, right after dinner, while my wife stood behind him, silent. No warning, no build-up, just those words, cold and final. And yet I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe years. It started small. A missed good night, a shrug instead of a hug, silence where laughter used to live. But I was a fool. I thought it was just the growing pains of a young man becoming independent. I thought I had time. That evening, the table was set just like always. 3 plates, water glasses, napkins folded neatly like my wife always did. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, but somehow the food tasted like nothing. My son, David, scrolled on his phone. My wife served in silence. I tried to speak. "David, how's the app coming along? You said you had a demo today, right?" He didn't look up. "Fine," he muttered. My wife didn't say anything either. She passed the potatoes to him and skipped me. That was new. I smiled anyway, pretending not to notice. Pretending I hadn't spent the last 6 months offering to help him with funding, only to be brushed off again and again. Pretending I didn't see the way they glanced at each other now, like conspirators. "Did I do something?" I asked, softly, trying to sound light. "Or did you two start a secret club I'm not invited to?" That's when David set his fork down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me for the first time in weeks. But there was no warmth in his eyes. "No, Dad," he said. "We're just done pretending." I looked between them. "Pretending what?" "That you're helping. That we need you around. That you're still the man we used to look up to." The room froze. I felt the floor shift beneath me, like the house itself had turned against me. "I see," I said, swallowing hard. But I didn't. I didn't see anything. I was trying to make sense of the words, but they kept cutting deeper every time I replayed them in my mind. My wife looked away. Her face held no protest, no surprise, just quiet agreement. "We don't need you anymore," David repeated. "Not in the business, not in the house. It's time." Time? I built this house with my hands. I took extra shifts to pay off our mortgage early. I skipped vacations, dreams, hobbies, so my family could have everything. And now I was a burden. I stared at the dinner plate in front of me. The chicken had gone cold. The steam had vanished, just like the warmth in this family. But I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I nodded, pushed the chair back, stood up. And in that moment, something in me died. Not just because my son said those words, but because I believed he meant them. I left the table and went upstairs. My heart was loud in my chest, but the house remained silent. The kind of silence that settles in after a funeral. Friends, let me pause for just a moment. Would you mind sharing in the comments? Where are you listening from? Have you ever experienced something like this in your own life? A moment when someone you loved pushed you away? If this story touches something in your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. It's a small action, but it truly helps us grow and reach more people who need these stories. Now, let's continue. He used to run into my arms. I still remember how his small feet would thump against the hardwood floor when I came home from work. No matter how tired I was, how worn down by the world outside, his little arms around my neck made everything right again. "Daddy's home!" he'd shout. That sound used to be the anchor of my life. But that boy, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, he's gone. David is 22 now, tall, sharp jawline, confident in that careless way young men often are when they think they've figured out the world too soon. He walks with the same stride I had at his age, but his shoulders are heavier, and not from responsibility, from resentment. I don't know when the warmth faded. It wasn't sudden, like a light switch. It was more like watching a photograph slowly blur, edges softening, colors fading, until one day you realize you're just staring at a shadow of what used to be. He doesn't look me in the eye anymore. When I speak, he barely responds. Sometimes I ask about his day, just trying to hold on to any thread of connection. "Fine," he says. One word, sometimes not even that, just a nod. There was a time he'd come into my room late at night, asking about life, girls, his future. He used to care what I thought. Now I don't even know what he's thinking. I feel like a stranger living in the same house as his silence. He closes his door a lot now. That sound, click, echoes louder than it should. I stare at that closed door longer than I care to admit. Sometimes I stand outside it with my hand half raised, thinking I'll knock. But I never do, because I'm afraid, not of him, but of what he'll say, or worse, what he won't. I tried once. Just once. I knocked lightly and asked if we could talk. The door stayed closed. He didn't say no, he just didn't say anything at all, and somehow that was worse than rejection. It was indifference. What happened to us? I go through old photos sometimes, those printed ones you can actually hold in your hand. There's one of us fishing by the lake. He's beaming, holding a fish too small to matter. But to him, it was everything. I remember that day clearly. He looked up at me and said, "I want to be just like you when I grow up." I believed him. I built my life around it. But something shifted along the way. Somewhere between college, work, and ambitions, I became a symbol of everything he didn't want to be. And I can't figure out how. I gave everything. Not just money or food or a roof, but me. My time, my soul, my quiet sacrifices. And now, I'm just the man who walks through the house like a ghost. He doesn't ask where I'm going. Doesn't say goodnight. Doesn't ask if I'm okay. Sometimes I wonder if he even sees me anymore. I hear him laughing with his friends over video calls, animated, alive. But when I walk into the room, the light in his eyes dims. It's like I drain something out of him by existing near him. I don't think he hates me. No, hatred would mean he still feels something. What he feels now is worse. He has decided I'm no longer necessary. And when a father feels that from his only son, it doesn't break him in one loud snap. It's slower, quieter, like a rope unraveling thread by thread until one day it just gives way. And no one even hears it fall. My birthday came and went like a forgotten envelope slid under a pile of unopened mail. No one said a word. Not at breakfast, not during the day, not even a tired, "happy birthday" muttered in passing. The silence stung more than any argument ever could. It used to be a day, nothing extravagant. I never asked for that. But my wife would bake that same vanilla cake with chocolate frosting, the one I pretended not to like just so she'd feel like she surprised me. David would give me those handmade cards, drawings of us fishing or building things in the garage. I kept them all, every single one. But this year, there was nothing. I woke up early that morning, thinking maybe they were planning something. I told myself not to expect anything, but I still listened for whispers, footsteps, laughter. I even shaved and put on that old checked shirt David once called my hero shirt. I waited all day. Nothing came. The hours stretched like an empty hallway. They moved around the house as usual, like it was just another Thursday. No candles. No mention. My name didn't even pass their lips. I told myself they were busy. That maybe they'd surprise me at dinner, but dinner was leftover pizza. No one sat down together. They ate in separate rooms. I heated mine up in the microwave, the cheese stiff and rubbery. Even the dog looked confused. He followed me around the kitchen, tail low, like he knew something had been forgotten. Or someone. I ended up in the garage, not because I planned to, but because I didn't know where else to go. The garage was mine, still smelled faintly of wood shavings and old motor oil. There was dust on the workbench, and a single light bulb flickering overhead. I sat down in the chair by the shelves and let the silence wrap around me. That's when I pulled out the box, the one marked Memories. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were the photo albums, cracked leather covers, faded pages. I flipped through them slowly, my fingers trembling more than I'd like to admit. David's first steps. His kindergarten graduation. Camping trips. That one time we built a treehouse that tilted too far to one side, but he still called it perfect. His tiny hands always reaching for mine. His smile always pointed at me. And now? I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me like that. Each photo felt like a lie now. Like a cruel reminder of something I'd lost but never really noticed slipping away. Somewhere along the way, the boy who once clung to me during thunderstorms learned to live without me. Or worse, chose to. I sat there in the garage for a long time. I don't know how long. The house was dark when I finally looked up. No one had come looking. No one noticed I was gone. The ache in my chest wasn't from loneliness. It was from knowing that I had become optional. I pressed one of the old drawings to my chest, the one where he scribbled, "Best Dad Ever," in uneven letters. I wanted to believe that version of me still existed in his eyes, but I knew better now. Sometimes love doesn't leave with a bang. Sometimes it just forgets your birthday. And in that silence, you realize you're no longer part of the story. Just a footnote no one reads anymore. It was nearly midnight when I heard them. I couldn't sleep. Again. The bed felt colder these days, even with someone lying next to me. My wife had started sleeping with her back to me, a silent wall I could no longer reach across. Sometimes she'd shift away when my arm brushed hers, like even my touch was inconvenient now. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fridge downstairs and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. That night, though, I heard something else. Muffled voices. Not angry, not loud, but low, focused, intimate in the way conspiracies often are. I sat up, held my breath, and listened. They were in the kitchen. I could tell by the faint clink of a glass being set down. I stepped out of the bedroom, careful not to let the old floorboards creak beneath me. I didn't want them to know I was listening. At first I couldn't make out the words, just the tones, tense, serious, like decisions were being made. And then I heard her voice, my wife, soft but heavy with meaning. He's just in the way now. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. In some ways that made it worse. There was no emotion in it, just fatigue, finality, like a sentence already decided. My legs went weak. I leaned against the wall, breath shallow, heart pounding. David responded, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. He's holding us back. That was all he said, but it was enough. Those words weren't shouted in the heat of an argument. They were whispered in quiet agreement, a conclusion they'd both come to, not tonight, but over time, maybe for months, maybe longer. I stood there in the hallway, surrounded by shadows, listening to the people I once loved more than my own breath talk about me like I was furniture, like I was dead weight to be cleared out to make room for something better, something newer. I wanted to walk in and say something, anything, to remind them of all I'd given, all I'd let go of to build this life. But the truth hit harder than pride ever could. They didn't care. Not anymore. I was a placeholder in their lives. Useful once, but no longer necessary. The provider who no longer had anything to offer. The man who stayed up with a feverish child. Who worked weekends and holidays to keep the lights on. Who skipped vacations so the mortgage would be paid early. But love, it seems, has an expiration date when it's no longer convenient. I backed away from the hallway slowly, careful not to make a sound. The weight in my chest was suffocating, like something inside me had caved in. I went to the garage again. It had become my hiding place, my refuge. I sat there in the dark, the hum of silence pressing in on me, and I stared at the cold concrete floor. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because the pain had gone so far past tears that it no longer had a voice. I kept thinking about those words, in the way, not hurtful, not broken, not distant, just in the way. Like a traffic cone, like a box in the hallway, like a stain on the carpet. When did I become that? I thought of David as a child, sleeping on my chest. I thought of my wife in the early years, when she used to trace circles on my arm while we fell asleep. I thought of all the little promises I made to them, that I'd always protect them, always be there, always do right by them. But no one tells you that sometimes love becomes silent, not because it dies, but because it gets rewritten without you. And now I was living in the quiet aftermath, listening to the people I gave everything to, make plans for a life that no longer included me. There's a particular kind of silence that settles between a father and son, the kind that isn't angry or loud, but hollow, a space where words used to live, where advice and stories once passed freely, now just emptiness. That's where David and I existed, not in conflict. That would have meant we still had something to fight for. No, we floated beside each other like strangers who once shared a life. But I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Despite the birthday forgotten, the closed doors, the late-night whispers that still haunted me, I told myself maybe I could still reach him. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I hadn't tried hard enough. That thought alone was a sharp blade, because trying was all I ever did, every day. Quietly, without applause. I knew he was working on a business idea, a mobile app, something with scheduling and task automation. I didn't understand the full picture, but I knew it mattered to him. He spent hours in his room coding, sketching ideas on whiteboards he mounted on his walls. I heard him on video calls at night, speaking confidently to people who called him Sir. My son, 22, and already a boss. I watched from a distance, like a ghost observing the living. But one afternoon I gathered what courage I had left. I knocked gently on his door, heart pounding, already bracing for the brush-off. He opened it just enough to lean against the frame, arms crossed, eyes tired, or maybe just tired of me. "I was thinking," I said cautiously, "maybe I could help out. I've got some savings left. If you need funding for the app, or maybe help organizing the next phase." He didn't let me finish. A breath, a half laugh that wasn't amused. "I've got it, Dad," he said flatly. "You wouldn't understand anyway." And that was it. No thanks, no interest, no follow-up. Just those 7 words. The quiet dismissal of a man who had once been his hero. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'd learned by now not to push. Pushing only built higher walls. So I stepped back, smiled like it didn't hurt, and said, "All right, just let me know if you need anything." But he didn't. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a long moment in the hallway, staring at the grain of the wood like it could somehow explain where everything went wrong. I didn't want to cry, but something in me cracked, not loudly but deep and quiet. A shift in the earth beneath my ribs, the kind of break you don't notice at first, until the structure finally gives way. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. The same hands that taught him how to tie his shoes. That caught him when he jumped from the swing. That clapped the loudest at his school plays, even when he forgot his lines. Now they were just hands, empty, uninvited. I couldn't stop thinking about all the sacrifices I'd made along the way, and how invisible they'd become. The promotions I turned down to make it to soccer games. The vacations we never took because David needed braces. The way I let my dreams grow smaller so his could have room to breathe. And still, he looked at me like I didn't get it. He was probably right. Maybe I didn't understand algorithms or product launches. Maybe I didn't speak the slick, polished language of investors and KPIs. But I understood what it meant to build something from nothing. I'd done it. A life, a home, a family. And none of it came with applause. Now I was being quietly edited out of the picture. He had his world now. Modern, digital, fast-moving. And I was something outdated. A presence that reminded him of things he'd outgrown. That night I sat on the back porch alone. The stars above were faint, washed out by the streetlights, but still there, still burning, unnoticed. I wondered if David would ever look back and realize what I tried to do that day. If he'd ever remember the effort behind my quiet offer. Not the money, not the help, but the reaching. The way a father, even after being made invisible, still holds out his hand. Just once more, just in case his son needs him. But that hand was left hanging in the dark. And some part of me, the last trembling part that still hoped, finally began to let go. It was pouring outside, the kind of rain that felt like the sky was trying to wash the world clean. I stood in the doorway of the living room, water dripping from my coat, boots leaving dark footprints on the hardwood. David's silhouette was backlit by the flickering street lamp, rain streaking past the window behind him like a curtain. I could feel the weight of the moment before he even spoke, every drop of rain echoing in my chest like a metronome, counting down to something I feared. Then he looked at me, his eyes steady and colder than the wind whipping through the cracks in the window frame. For a heartbeat, I thought he might hesitate, but he didn't. His voice was calm, almost detached, as if he were reading from a script someone else had written for him. "We don't need you anymore." The words landed on my skin like shards of ice. They cut through the haze of rain and memory, carving out a hollow space inside me that I didn't know could exist. I felt each syllable pierce the years I had devoted to him, the midnight feedings, the scraped knees I'd kissed better, the late-night talks about his hopes, the early mornings I'd sacrificed to get to the factory before dawn, so he'd wake to a house that still had heat. All of it, erased in a single breath. I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout that I had given him everything, my time, my dreams, even my body when I worked extra shifts so he could have baseball lessons. I wanted to remind him that the man standing in front of him was once the reason he felt safe, the hands he trusted to catch him when he jumped too high, the voice that sang him to sleep during thunderstorms. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. The apology I longed to offer, a plea to be seen, to be needed, got stuck somewhere in my chest, trapped by the shock of a son's betrayal. He was right, though. In that moment, I saw it as clearly as he did. I was standing on the periphery of a life I had built for him, and he was stepping into his own narrative, one where I was no longer a chapter but a footnote. The rain drummed louder, and the world outside felt more real than the home I had created inside these walls. He turned away then, as though the man he once ran to was now nothing more than a shadow he needed to leave behind. I simply nodded, an almost imperceptible movement of my head. No tears, no anger. I took a single step backward, then another, feeling the boards of the floor creak beneath me as I retreated. My dignity felt heavy, like the soaked coat clinging to my shoulders. I walked up the stairs in silence, each step echoing off the walls like a tolling bell, marking the end of something that had once felt unbreakable. By the time I reached the top landing, the rain had seeped into the house, cold droplets clinging to my hair. I paused in the hallway, hand on the banister, and for the first time in years, I didn't know where to go. My son's words still rang in my ears, sharper than any thunderclap. "We don't need you anymore." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped into the darkness of the empty guest room. The door clicked softly behind me, sealing me away, not just from my son, but from the life I had built. In that quiet, with the storm raging outside, I felt something fracture inside me, an invisible line snapping, leaving me neither here nor there, but suspended in a silence more profound than any speech could ever be. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, a single desk lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the room. My pen hovered over crisp white stationery, but the words wouldn't come easily. Every sentence felt weighted, each syllable a confession I'd kept buried too long. Outside, the storm had softened to a distant rumble, but inside me the thunder still rolled. I thought of David, the confident young man who had once clung to my leg as a toddler, the teenager who chased my approval like a lifeline. I thought of his sharp jaw and silhouette, the way his eyes had gone cold at my presence just hours before. My chest tightened with the ache of a father's love, the kind that holds you together even when you're being torn apart. Finally, I began to write. My hand shook as I addressed him, not as son, but by his name, David, because I wanted him to know this was from me, a man who remembered every promise he'd ever made to the boy he loved. I wrote about my fears, how it felt to be cast aside, how the silence cut deeper than any argument. I wrote about my pride, how I'd held back tears so I wouldn't scare him, how I'd swallowed every harsh word so he wouldn't feel my pain. I told him, simply and honestly, what I could not say aloud, that no matter what he thought, he was needed, that a father's heart never stops wanting to be seen, to be part of his child's story. When the pen ran dry, I reread the letter twice, smoothing out smudges with a trembling finger. I folded the paper along its crisp creases, slid it into a plain envelope, and wrote David on the front in my neatest script. My breath caught when I realized I wasn't sure I had the right to ask for anything in return, only to let him know the truth. I carried the envelope down the stairs as quietly as I could, the house silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stepped into his room without knocking, the floor cool beneath my socks. His desk was cluttered with notebooks, half-empty coffee mugs, scattered pens, signs of a life I wasn't part of anymore. My hand trembled as I placed the envelope face up among the chaos, the stark white paper standing out like a beacon. I didn't say a word. I didn't linger. I turned and left, the door clicking softly behind me. In the hush that followed, I felt both terrified and relieved. The letter was out of my hands now. Whatever he chose to do with it would be beyond my control. As I climbed back into bed, the storm outside finally broke, and rain pattered against the window like a cleansing hymn. I closed my eyes, hoping that in the quiet of the night my words would reach him, and maybe, just maybe, draw him back. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains as I knelt by the closet, folding the few shirts I owned into neat stacks. My hands trembled with each movement, not from cold, but from the weight of what I was doing. Each item I packed felt like a memory I was closing off. The worn leather jacket I bought for my 50th birthday, the baseball cap David once left behind after a game, the faded photograph of the three of us at the lake. I placed them all into a battered duffel bag, the zipper catching on worn seams as though resisting the separation. In the quiet of the house, every creak of the floorboards sounded like a question. My wife still slept, her steady breathing a reminder of the life I was walking away from. David's door was closed, the letter I'd left lying untouched on his desk. I wondered if he even noticed it, or if it lay buried beneath homework and coffee mugs, invisible to him as I had become. The bag was heavy when I slung it over my shoulder. I paused in the hallway, staring into the darkened rooms that held our history. I could almost hear the echo of footsteps, tiny, eager footsteps chasing me around the kitchen island. I could almost see the steam from a hot chocolate cup that David insisted I try because, "Dad, you have to taste it." I could almost feel the warmth of my wife's hand slipping into mine on cold winter nights. I swallowed hard and continued on, each step taking me further from the man I thought I was. At the front door I stopped again, my hand on the brass knob. The early morning sky was a pale strip of color beyond the glass, promising a new day that didn't include me here. My heart pounded, half hopeful that someone, anyone, would rush down the stairs, call my name, demand I stay. But the stairwell remained silent. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the eaves, like the world itself weeping. I closed my eyes and remembered the first day I brought David home from the hospital, how his tiny fingers curled around mine as though I were his whole world. I remembered his first word, his first step, the first time he called me Dad, with pure joy in his voice. Every memory was a drop in an ocean of love I had poured into this family. My eyes opened, and I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than any shout. The air was cool against my face, carrying the scent of wet grass and fresh beginnings. I took one last look at the house, our home of 25 years, standing silent and unknowing behind me. Then I turned and walked down the front path, duffel bag in hand, leaving the empty porch light on as the only witness to my departure. With each step, the knot in my chest tightened, but somewhere beneath the ache, a small flame flickered. It wasn't hope for what I'd lost. It was hope for what I might find. A chance to rebuild a life where I could be seen, heard, and needed again. And so I walked into the gray morning, carrying nothing but my memories and the fragile belief that maybe, one day, the people I loved would see me again, not as a burden, but as the father and husband I had always been. David found the envelope mid-morning, as sunlight filtered through his blinds and dust motes danced in the beam. He was rubbing the sleep from his eyes, pushing aside empty coffee cups and the tangled cords of his laptop charger, when the stark white rectangle caught his gaze. He paused, squinting at the neat script. David. And for a moment, he thought it might be a junk mail slip, one of those surveys nobody ever answered. He tossed it onto his desk, barely glancing at the thicker-than-usual paper. Hours passed as he lost himself in code, debugging lines and chasing deadlines, but the envelope nagged at the edge of his vision, as persistent as an itch he couldn't scratch. Finally, curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, got the better of him. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The seal was unbroken, no return address, just my father's handwriting. He tore it open, the paper crackling, and pulled out the folded letter. His first instinct was to roll his eyes. What now? Another lecture? Another apology I didn't want? He unfolded it carelessly, ready to skim and toss. But the first line stopped him cold. Son, if you're reading this, I've already left. His fingers halted. He sat back, the paper trembling in his hand. The letter wasn't angry, it wasn't pleading, it was honest, painfully, achingly honest. He read on, I never told you, because I wanted you to believe in yourself. But sometimes, believing in you meant letting you think you didn't need me. He swallowed hard and continued. With each paragraph, a new revelation unfolded. How he worked 2 jobs after his own father died, saving every penny to build a future for us. The night he sold his beloved motorcycle to pay for David's braces, ignoring his own need for freedom. The thousands he invested quietly, framing it as a gift, only when the startup was turning a profit, so David would never feel indebted. The day he turned down a promotion that would have meant a bigger paycheck, because it required relocating across the country. He stayed so that David could graduate with his friends, so that the family wouldn't break. His breath caught. The man who never missed a recital, who stood in the bleachers through rain and snow, had carried invisible burdens, burdens David hadn't known existed. There were pages filled with dates and numbers, receipts tucked between sentences, proof of sacrifices buried in spreadsheets. And at the end, a photo slipped out. It showed his father standing in the backyard, soaked from the rain, face turned to the sky as though welcoming the storm. On its back, scrawled, "I did this for us." David sank in his chair, the letter heavy in his lap. A storm of emotions raged inside him, shame, grief, regret, love, all colliding like thunderheads on the horizon. He pressed his palm to his forehead, eyes stinging, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the distant hum of his computer. For the first time in months, he truly saw his father, not as an obstacle or an outdated advisor, but as a man who had given everything he had without needing recognition in return, a man who had borne the weight of silent devotion so David could shine. His head fell forward, resting on the desk. He closed his eyes and felt the sting of tears he'd refused to shed. The envelope lay open beside him, its secrets now laid bare. Truth had a power he'd underestimated, a power to heal, to shatter, to rebuild. David picked up the letter again, tracing the lines with a fingertip. He whispered into the quiet room, voice thick, I'm sorry. Outside, the world carried on, but inside that small space, a reckoning had begun, a son awakening to the depth of a father's love and the first flicker of a bridge rising from the ruins of their silence. Each confession in that letter felt like a confession of my soul, laid bare for David's eyes alone. I watched him read, page after page, as if the weight of every secret sacrifice pressed down on his chest. My pen trembled when I wrote the first words about his college debt, how I quietly sent every check when tuition bills arrived, sometimes missing meals so I could afford it. I described the nights I sat at the kitchen table, calculator and bills spread before me, cradling my aching back as I balanced the numbers. I never told him, because I wanted him to build his own path, unburdened by the knowledge of my struggle. Then I revealed the cost of giving up my dream job, how I had been offered a position that I'd worked toward for decades, a chance to travel the world and lead a team I admired. I told him how, the night before I declined the offer, I lay awake thinking about missing his soccer games, the school recitals, the laughter over burnt pancakes on weekend mornings. I let that dream slip through my fingers so I could be home, so every first step, every scraped knee, and every proud moment was ours together. I watched his eyes blur with tears when he read about the car I sold, the red coupe I'd promised myself once I'd paid off the mortgage. I had traded its roar of freedom for the cost of his startup, the one he'd told me he didn't need me for. I described signing the title over to a stranger in a dimly lit office, feeling the keys slip from my pocket like a final surrender. I never let him know because I wanted him to believe he had built the business on his own grit, not on his father's hidden wallet. And then I confessed the hardest truth. I never told him any of this because I believed love meant setting him free. I thought independence was the greatest gift I could give. I wanted him to stand tall without leaning on me, but in my silence, I had built walls between us. In trying to honor his autonomy, I became the distance he learned to cross around. David pressed the letter to his chest, the pages crumpling under his fingers. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting golden light into the room where father and son sat, separated by more than just time. I had given him everything, a home, education, my own dreams, and kept it hidden in the quiet corners of my heart. And now, in that moment, I realized that true sacrifice should never go unnoticed, for it is in being seen and thanked that love truly lives. David's world seemed to shift beneath him as he stared at the letter, each line sinking in with the weight of a confession he'd never imagined. His chest tightened so fiercely it felt as though his ribs would crack under the pressure of regret. He read the first paragraph again, then once more, as if he could will the words into a different shape, one that didn't expose his blind spot for a father's sacrifice. His hands trembled, causing the paper to flutter like a wounded bird. There was no bitterness in my tone, no pleading or reproach, only a quiet weariness that spoke of years spent loving in silence. As he traced the neat loops of my handwriting, he could almost hear my voice, calm and measured, each sentence carrying the exhaustion of a man who had given everything without asking for anything in return. It was the exhaustion of a parent watching a child grow up too fast, the exhaustion of a soul bearing the weight of unshared truths. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring the ink until the words smudged into one another. He blinked them back, but more kept coming, hot and unrelenting. Regret flooded him. Regret for every curt dismissal, for every wall he'd built between us, for every moment he'd mistaken my quiet presence for complacence. He remembered how he'd refused my help, how he'd shut me out in favor of proving himself, never realizing he was proving nothing at all. He pressed his forehead to the desk, the letter crumpling beneath the weight of his grief. The tremor in his hands grew stronger, and he let the tears fall freely at last. The man who had once been his anchor now seemed a stranger bearing witness to his own son's breakdown, silent on the other end of the page but powerful in his absence. In the hum of the computer and the distant city sounds, David felt utterly alone, but for the words on that paper, which held him in a painful embrace. He read sentence after sentence, discovering not only the sacrifices but the love behind them, the sleepless nights, the hidden bank transfers, the forsaken dreams. Each revelation struck him like a tidal wave, leaving him gasping for breath. When he finally looked up, the letter lay across the desk in a soaked, wrinkled heap. His shoulders shook with sobs, the kind that come from deep within, from a place where pride and guilt and sorrow collide. He whispered my name into the empty room. Dad. As if calling me back from the silence I'd retreated into. The realization settled over him like a shadow. He had been wrong. He had mistaken distance for strength, solitude for independence, and in doing so he had almost lost the man who loved him most. The ache in his chest was heavy enough to buckle his knees, yet beneath it lay something fragile and new. The first flicker of understanding, of compassion, of a bond he long thought severed. And in that moment of brokenness, he knew his world would never be the same. The silence had finally given way to truth, and although it hurt more than he could have imagined, it also offered the first step toward something neither of them had dared hope for. Redemption. He fumbled with his phone, thumbs trembling as he scrolled through my name in his contacts, Dad. But when he tapped it, the screen blinked dead. No answer, no voicemail, nothing but the hollow buzz of unanswered calls. He dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and slammed the car door, his breath coming fast in the still morning air. He drove like a man possessed, tires kicking up gravel as he retraced every corner of our neighborhood. He stopped at the corner where I used to wait for the school bus, bracing himself for a sign, my car in the driveway, the garage door half open, a light on inside. But every house was dark, every driveway empty. The only sound was the engine, idling in his ears as though mocking him. He pulled up to our old favorite coffee shop, the one where I used to buy him his first cup of cocoa when he pulled all-nighters for college. The place was shuttered for the morning, wind chimes swinging lifelessly in the doorway. He pounded on the glass, heart pounding louder than the knocks, but there was no answer, only his reflection staring back, eyes wild with panic. He texted his closest college friend, Mark, hoping for a glimpse of me or a rumor, anything. "Have you seen my dad?" His thumb hovered over send as his mind raced back to the nights we'd spent shooting pool at Mark's apartment, him cheering me on. Mark replied hours later, "Haven't seen him, sorry man." Desperation clawed at him. He remembered how I loved to stop at that little park by the river to feed the ducks when he was little. Maybe I'd gone there. He screeched around the bend, half expecting to find me on the bench, tossing crumbs and staring at the water. But the bench was empty, the grass undisturbed. The ducks glided away as his headlights swept over the bank. In each face he passed on the street, mail carriers, joggers, early rising neighbors, he saw a flicker of recognition that never quite blossomed into acknowledgement. He flagged down a retired neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who once helped me teach David to ride a bike. "Have you seen my dad?" he asked, voice desperate, eyes pleading. Mr. Thompson shook his head, silence echoing louder than any answer. The sun climbed higher, light pouring through the windshield like an accusation. He drove to the high school parking lot where I'd volunteered at football games, hoping some coach or parent might have spotted me. The lot was empty. He traced my steps in his mind, home, the garage, my desk, the envelope, but after that, nothing. He felt achingly, painfully aware of how little he knew about the man he thought he'd understood. The man who had turned his world upside down with a single envelope. The man who, in the quiet of dawn, had vanished without a trace. He parked on a quiet street, hands gripping the wheel, head bowed. He closed his eyes and whispered a plea. "Please, Dad, come home." But the neighborhood remained indifferent, eerily silent. No lights flickered on behind drawn curtains. No engine roared in the distance. Only the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, as though the world itself wasn't sure where I had gone, or if I'd ever truly been there at all. David stood alone in the garage, the afternoon light slanting through the dusty windows and illuminating motes that danced in slow motion. He ran a hand along the spine of the leather-bound photo album perched on the shelf, its surface cracked and worn from years of being opened, closed, and passed between us. The familiar scent of aged paper and memories hit him like a physical force, and his chest tightened. He lifted the album down, settling onto the workbench stool with a soft creak beneath him. He opened the cover, and the world of his childhood spilled out. The crooked grin on his face as he held up the first frog he ever caught, the triumphant pose in a too-large baseball jersey after his first home run, the night I sat beside his bed to calm his fever with ragged towels and whispered stories about the stars. Each photograph held a lifetime in a single moment, and each moment was a promise he'd taken for granted. He traced his fingertip over the picture of us at the lake shore, me guiding his small hands on the handlebars of that bright red bike. He remembered the way the sun had sparkled on the water, the breeze lifting his hair, the triumphant shout when I let go and he discovered he could ride on his own. I had caught him when he wobbled, steadying him until he found his balance. His heart pounded again as he realized how many times I had helped him find his footing, only for him to push me away when he thought he no longer needed my support. He flipped to another page, a photo of the two of us in the bleachers, covered in blankets, cheering on his little league team in the pouring rain. I had sat with him through every soggy inning, offering pats on the back and warm encouragement. He saw the look of pride on my face, the same look he used to crave. Now he realized how fleeting those moments had become, swallowed by silent dinners and closed doors. He paused on the image of me reading him to sleep, the soft glow of a nightlight on my face, as I turned the pages of a dog-eared storybook. He remembered the gentle rise and fall of my voice, the comfort of my presence when his fever spiked, and he trembled with chills. That night I had held his hand until the fever broke, battling exhaustion so he could feel safe. He felt a fresh wave of remorse crash through him. The silence of the garage pressed in around him, broken only by the soft rustling of pages and the distant hum of traffic outside. He closed the album gently, as though afraid to let go of those moments forever. He pressed both hands to his forehead, bowing his head until his chin touched his chest. The tears came without warning, hot, unrestrained, tracing clean lines down his cheeks. He whispered into the stillness, voice trembling, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough." He knew that. But it was the truest thing he could say to the shadows of the past, and to the empty room where his father's absence loomed larger than any photograph. Regret echoed around him, a chorus of all the times he'd shut the door on a hug, brushed off a question, dismissed an offer of help. Each echo was a reminder that love unspoken can crumble into dust. He stood, clutching the album to his chest as if it were a lifeline. In that moment he vowed to carry these memories forward, to honor the sacrifices hidden in plain sight, and to seek a way back to the man who had built his world so quietly. The apology lingered on his lips, carried in the air of the garage like a fragile promise, that he would not let silence claim them again. Weeks later I was stacking boxes in the corner of my tiny one-bedroom apartment, books I hadn't dared unpack, clothes folded into neat piles on the floor, when I heard a hesitant knock at the door. My heart froze for a moment, because in all my plans, I never imagined he'd actually come looking. The hallway light hummed above me as I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened the door. There he stood, older somehow, the same determined set to his jaw, but with tears glistening in his eyes. His coat was rumpled, his hair mussed as if he'd run here without a second thought for himself. I shut the door behind us and stepped back, taking him in. The way his shoulders slumped with relief and exhaustion, the way his hands trembled as he finally dared to reach toward me. He fell to his knees on the thin rug in front of me, head bowed, hands gripping the fabric like he needed something solid to hold on to. He looked up, voice cracking as he whispered, "Dad, please come home." Time slowed. I stood frozen, stomach tight, as all the guilt and longing I'd carried for weeks washed over me in a single wave. His tears, those raw, pleading tears, cut through the years of silence I'd wrapped around my heart. I wanted so badly to say something wise, something comforting, but the words were tangled in my throat. After what felt like an eternity, I bent down and put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at the touch, as if he still expected rejection, but then pressed his forehead against my palm. I could feel his shaking breath. I swallowed hard, my own eyes stinging. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me since I left. "Do you still not need me?" He looked up, and in that instant I saw everything. The regret that had driven him here. The love that had pulled him across boundaries I never thought he would cross. His lips trembled as he whispered, "I need you so much, it hurts." I stepped forward and lifted him to his feet. We stood in the cramped living room, surrounded by half-empty boxes and the pale morning light filtering through thin curtains. Without another word, we embraced, tight, unsteady, as if we were rediscovering each other in arms that had once known each other perfectly. His shoulders shook, and I felt the weight of his sorrow and relief press against my chest. In that small apartment, broken and fragile as it was, we found something stronger than the house I had walked away from, an unspoken promise that neither time nor silence could ever truly erase what bound us together. And as we held each other there, tears mingling and hearts unclenching, I knew our story wasn't over. It was only beginning anew. We arrived that evening under a sky streaked with lavender and gold, not to the house I once abandoned, but to a new home, one we both helped build with the fragile tools of trust and forgiveness. The front door swung open on silent hinges, and inside the rooms were brighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had learned from our absence and softened toward us. We set our bags down in the living room, and David paused by the window, looking out over the quiet street. I watched him catch his breath, the weight of the past weeks still softening in his shoulders. He turned then, a tentative smile touching his lips, and walked back toward the kitchen where I'd set the table. The table wasn't perfect. The wood was scarred from years of family meals, and one chair wobbled when I sat in it. But as he laid out the plates, I realized those imperfections were a testament to our history, a history we were ready to honor rather than erase. He poured us each a glass of water, then hesitated as if testing the new rhythm between us. I met his eyes and nodded, inviting him to speak. The silence that followed was warm, full of possibility rather than dread. Then he began, quietly at first, "Dad, I wanted you to know." His voice cracked and he swallowed, searching my face until he found the courage to continue. "I respect you, all of you. The sacrifices, the quiet strength, the times you stayed when I pushed you away." A truth I'd yearned to hear for years. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. The vulnerability in his eyes shimmered like glass, ready to break or to shine. And then in a voice steady with emotion, he said the words I'd dreamed of. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." They fell into the room like soft rain, washing away the echoes of "we don't need you anymore." In their place rose something new, gratitude, respect, and the undeniable bond of father and son. Dinner continued, not in the hush of unspoken tension, but with conversation that rose and fell like music. He told me about his plans, his dreams, this time inviting me into the story instead of shutting me out. I listened, offering advice only when he asked, knowing now that love is measured not by the words we impose, but by the respect we earn. After we cleared the table, we sat together on the back porch. The night air was cool, the stars bright overhead, and between us lay the gentle hum of belonging. No grand declarations were needed, only the steady presence of two hearts learning to beat in time once more. This was our new beginning, not erasing the past, but weaving it into a stronger tapestry of understanding. Boundaries had been rebuilt, respect had been earned, and love, intact, tested, and triumphant, guided us forward into whatever chapters lay ahead.